basically like blocking out
Yeah.
anything from in the room going out to the stream. Um, but yeah, fine, never mind.
So what Kieran's saying, that's just.
Oh yeah, it's picking it up on YouTube. That's interesting.
So
He's got mic.
Right, good morning, everyone. I think we'll get cracking. It's 10 o'clock. So good morning, welcome to this morning's meeting of Cabinet on the 11th of October. I'm Councillor Richard Clare, Leader of the Council, Chairman of Cabinet, and will be presiding over the meeting. Before the meeting begins, I'll ask each Cabinet member to confirm their attendance for those watching on the live stream, and we went from that end this time, so we'll start with Laura this time.
Morning, I'm Councillor Laura Mays. I'm the Cabinet Member for Children's Services, Education and Skills and Deputy Leader.
Good morning, Ian Blair Pilling, portfolio holder for Public Health, Public Protection, Leisure, Libraries and our operational assets, which includes therefore facilities management.
So Nick Bottrell, I'm Cabinet Member for Finance, Development Management and Strategic Planning.
Morning, I'm Councillor Phil Orford, Member for Housing, Strategic Assets and Asset Transfers.
Morning everyone, I'm Ashley O'Neill, Cabinet Member for Governance, IT, Broadband, Digital Licensing, Staffing, Communities and Area Boards. And how many is that? 7. Thank you.
Morning, I'm Mark McClelland and Cabinet Member for Transport, Waste, Street Scene and Flooding.
Thank you. It's clearly time for a review of Cabinet roles, not the actual what we're doing, but just the titles, just to bring Ashley's down and increase everyone else's out, just for balance. It's clearly needed. So if any other members can introduce themselves when they're called to speak, I will now formally open the meeting. We have apologies from Councillor Jane Davies. Do we have any other apologies? No? Okay, thank you. So if we then come on to the minutes of the previous meeting, does anyone have any comments on the minutes? Phil, I know that you did, yeah.
Yeah, on in the reports pack on page 15, for the service devolution asset transfer policy, it gives the reason for decision, and I think it's incorrect. It appears to have been just copied from the previous item. I don't know if anyone can see that. Looking at the admin people. Guys, can you pick that one up? Yes, you can get that.
Thanks. So if we can just check that, please, and amend accordingly if required. Are there any other comments on the minutes? Okay, in which case, if do I have approval for the minutes? All those in favour, please. Thank you. Declarations of interest. Do we have any? No? Great. Leaders' announcements. I am not going to provide an update, a further update on cost of living today. That we've got full council coming up next week where we've got a paper on the topic. I'll make sure that any further adjustments or information are updated then. There is a lot more work going on, as you'd expect, but we went through it in quite some detail last time, and we will be discussing it next week. So I thought we would save that detail for that discussion. If we then come on to public participation and questions from councillors, we have got questions in from Ms. Mel Boyle. I don't see Mel with us. No. And then from Dr. Celia Beckett. Did you have a supplementary? If you could come up, please, and then put the microphone on using the right-hand button. Otherwise, no one can hear you on the... Marvellous, thank you. Your supplementary.
Thank you. I'm Dr. Celia Beckett, Chair of the Hilperton Area Action Group, and we're working under the auspices of both Hilperton and Staverton Parish Council. I wanted to, I wanted to thank you for your response to our question. And I note in your response that you consider infrastructure, transport and environmental constraints, as well as the availability of land in reaching a decision about the site allocation. The majority of the land at Staverton and Hilperton, sites 4 and 5, is bordered by the canal and the river. The lack of crossings of both the river and the canal make transport solutions to service new estates impossible, compounded by the severe flooding in the Staverton area. In addition, this land is a vital wildlife corridor, part of a special area of conservation for bats. All these concerns were raised by 495 people who responded to the consultation. How are they being addressed?
Thank you. I mean, at the moment, if I answer and then if Nick wants to come in with anything further, at the moment, the local plan process requires us to go out, consult, get information, then go back out to further consult. It is being made more complicated by some degrees of uncertainty around government policy and housing numbers and the way that the local plan will work at the moment as well. So we're in that process. I cannot tell you right now because it's got to be a proper process based on evidence and based on the judgment of that evidence from professionals, from officers. So I can't tell you exactly how they will be, other than that has been fed in, and that you will see when we come back out for further consultation. You may find the sites have gone, you may find they're still there because the assessment reached whatever conclusion it reached. I don't know what that conclusion will be at the moment. It's an honest answer. It's not particularly helpful from your point of view, but it's as honest an answer as I can give. Nick, do you want to add anything?
There is nothing to add to that. You've summarised it very well, Richard. I mean, I'll just stress the fact that it is evidence-led process. That's the whole thrust of plan making, is that the evidence will determine these things. So you've raised some points. Those are part of, or an analysis of those will be part of the evidence.
Okay. Thank you.
No problem. I think it does really emphasise the need for residents to engage with the sites that come forward in a local plan at a very early stage. We just had a strategic planning meeting in Salisbury considering a development in Harnham that was already approved in the last iteration of the local plan. Gosh, must be 5 years ago now. And by that point, once it's been assigned to the local plan, all of the factors you're talking about pretty much become less relevant because they've already been overcome at that point. So raising them now is absolutely the way to be addressing this, particularly issues around flooding, ecology, the sort of things that you're mentioning. So you're doing everything you can. That's the best reassurance I can give. I can't tell you whether it'll be in or not. We have to see what the evidence says based on the numbers that we are required to provide when government finally finalise whether we have Stalinist top-down housing targets left or not. And then when we know those numbers, we then have to assess which sites are the least harmful or score best in that process on a number of factors, including assessments around economic development and issues around housing, around transport. There are a huge number of factors that go in.
Okay.
Thank you.
Thank you very much for your response.
So if we then come on to the first substantive item, item 6, which is the Council's response to climate emergency. I have cabinet responsibility in this area, so we'll run through this report. We are, as Council, following the motion passed by full Council, we bring back updates every 6 months, or as close as we can to every 6 months on the meeting schedule, to update both Cabinet and then full Council on the steps that have been taken in addressing the work around climate change and around carbon reduction. I will try not to go on too long. I have spent most of the weekend talking about this with UK 100. I will try and be succinct. If you look at the report, it breaks down activity into a number of areas. If I sort of look at summaries, transport, the tender process is complete for replacement of electric vehicle charging points for towns with a population of 10,000 or more. There's a grant support to town and parish councils to install EV charging. There was a webinar that was very well attended, so that process is now in train. Mark has been working with the LC WIPs, local cycling and walking infrastructure plans, looking at proposals to improve cycling and walking opportunities. That's working with town councils. I would also emphasise that we are really, my emphasis, or my view there is that the emphasis needs to be on joining up communities with dedicated cycle lanes. The idea of trying to, it's far more effective, far better for people if they're cycling, if they can cycle on a path where they don't have to deal with traffic as well, and where they have space to feel safe when cycling. Now, that seems to be the direction of travel that government policy has moved in as well. There was some tension a couple of years ago. Government policy seems to be moving that way. But I think it's really important that we are putting in infrastructure that our residents can use, particularly for leisure and particularly with younger children. The number of our residents who actually cycle to work is pretty low, mostly because they're going a long distance. Whereas the number of our residents who, if you go out on the roads on Sunday, want to go out cycling, seems to be pretty high. So we need to be supporting the areas where people want to be active and want to be engaging in cycling. I won't mention running anymore today. Air quality, we are replacing the old air quality monitoring stations. We're using community infrastructure levy funding to do that. And we've completed walking and cycling schemes on Hilperton Road in Trowbridge, the B3108 Winsley Road, and traffic-free routes between Hilperton and Meltram via Semington on Eastern Lane, and on Eastern Lane between Chippenham and Corsham. The Council House retrofit programme continues to build up pace. I think it's about 100 homes that have been retrofitted so far. I forget the precise number. I'm sure someone will tell me in a minute. We have now, and it says in here, on the notes I've got 8, we've completed assessments on 800. I think from the latest data I got from housing, it's close to 900 have now been assessed, so we can start doing that fabric first retrofit work at pace. You've got to assess them, you've got to understand exactly what work we're doing to get that programme working, and Phil may have more information in a minute. We've got our off-site construction for zero carbon homes, and I think it's the first 2 sites, total of 18 houses are, the first lot should be going in, they've got planning permission, should be going in early in the new year, and the second site is either house planning or is going through the planning process. So we should have our first 2 test sites there, which will give us a good assessment of how that is working, how those houses are working, and we can then make any adjustments needed as that programme continues. I would add, nationally, it's really encouraging to see the number of councils that are now shifting to zero carbon building for their council housing. When we decided we were going to do this 4 years ago, it was maybe 3-4 councils in the UK, talking to a lot of different climate change leads from councils of all persuasions, virtually everyone, where they have council house building programmes are now shifting to a zero carbon or something close to a passive house standard. Very hard to do passive house with modular construction, but you can achieve the same principles. We hosted a Natural Environment Summit for Wiltshire, bringing together key groups, organisations, to discuss how we can make proper, meaningful, long-term delivery on biodiversity net gain. Engaging there, particularly with the large landowners, some of the key organisations like the New Forest National Park, AONBs, National Trust. We had a very interesting range of speakers. I think it was a very good event. It's something we will be building on in the future. We've got to make sure that developers don't just put in, as I've seen now on two applications, the idea that you can build a hedge, you build on a field, and to give to biodiversity net gain, you put a hedge down one edge of the field that's surrounded on 3 sides by housing and a road on another. That's not really biodiversity net gain in my view. That's playing the system. So we've got to make sure that we actually get meaningful delivery through that programme. We've developed the Wiltshire Community Environmental Toolkit in partnership with Natural England to allow local communities to take the lead in defining, restoring biodiversity in their areas. If you want an example of how this is working, if you look at particularly Bradford-on-Avon and some of the work that they're doing, as a council, they are very engaged and they are driving that forward in a very sensible way. And we've got to be sensible as we look at this delivery, particularly around things like tree planting. We still have significant issues with large areas of chalk grass downland that need to be protected for other reasons, and putting lots of trees on them isn't particularly helpful. But where that analysis is being done and where we're working with the experts, it clearly shows that significant progress can be made. Rewilding is picking up pace. There were far more areas that were left to wildflowers this summer than last, and there were far fewer complaints, which was nice, because the first summer was interesting with a number of people talking about the desperate need to cut all the wildflowers down because they looked untidy. I think we're learning, which is great. Salisbury River Park, £27 million investment to reduce flood risk to, and it says 350 homes. I'm pretty sure, having represented that division, it's significantly more than that are actually at risk on the maps. And creating 2 hectares of enhanced riverside habitat is now underway. It looks like a terrible construction site at the moment. I appreciate that, but it will end up with more than 600 trees. 100 have come down, but there'll be 600 going in. And it will be a much better environment for wildlife in the middle of the city. The Solar Together scheme has, the bulk buy Solar Together scheme, we had about 10,000 applications. We've got more than 1,000 residents who've put down their deposit. which I think is 25% from memory, which suggests they will be going ahead with the full scheme. So that's great. They will be getting solar panels and or battery storage. And I think if you look broadly, the need for that solar and battery in order to deal with grid constraint, grid capacity issues is becoming really, really critical. We're working very closely with SSE on grid capacity. Ariane is in a lot of contact with them. And I was talking to what the National Strategic Director about that and saying that if they wanted, we could help sort of act as a, not exemplar council, but we could make sure that we could feed back in all the types of problems that both the county and district, in that we were unitary and covering both, were facing to try and help them deal with this issue in other parts of the country. And it's becoming a wider issue on the edges of London now. They're getting grid capacity issues that there weren't a few years ago. As people want more electric cars, the need to take some strain off the grid by putting solar panels and batteries on roofs is really important. Also, the need for the development of smart energy systems and a much more effective flow of energy to and from people's houses, and using battery storage in a more intelligent way is clearly going to be critical. I am going on, and I said I wouldn't go on too far, but there are a few more things to cover off. I will try and speed up. From our own sites, we've got solar canopies going in at Five Rivers. Ian can give a bit more detail on that perhaps in a minute. On waste, we continue to try and make our waste collection rounds more efficient. We've seen a slight reduction in the number of rounds needed, therefore the number of vehicles needed, by more effective plotting of the rounds. It's minimal stuff, but every little bit that we can do adds up to carbon that we are not emitting and savings that we're making. On recycling and waste collection, there's been an analysis done of the recycling that goes to our HRC sites, and there's an estimate that I think it's about 41% of the waste that's going there into the sort of unsorted generic waste could actually be being recycled or reused. So we do need, at some stage, we need to work out how to take that next step in boosting those recycling levels even higher. But if you look at our overall figures for the amount of waste that is not going to landfill, I think 80.9% of our waste is not going to landfill, which is good news. We are buying our own, through our own replacement of vehicles. We've had, 10 electric pool cars, 15 vans, and 7 bought so far, 17 more vans going through the process. Our carbon property carbon reduction scheme, we've had 50 projects, 17 more are underway. Again, I'll let other cabinet members come in on some of those. And the LED conversion scheme will be finished by March 2023, which is saving just under 2,000 tonnes of carbon a year. If you look at our own emissions as a council, they've fallen from something close to 24,000 tonnes a year in, and I'm not reading the figures, so Ariane, wave if I get these wrong, 24,000 tonnes a year in 2015. They were down to 5,375 tonnes in last year. So we've had significant reductions there, and that continues. And our photovoltaic generated last year 550,000 kilowatt hours. So there is an awful lot of progress being made there. I continue to lobby very firmly with government, both through I was at the Conservative Party conference, trying to avoid all of the political issues and concentrate on the issues around planning and on improvements around the environment, but also in my role as co-president of UK 100 and chair of the Countryside Climate Network. And I as I say, I spent last weekend there talking to other council leaders about and council cabinet members about what they can do to learn from others and what we can do to learn from what they're doing to continue to find innovative ways to make progress on this front. I think that's probably enough from me on this report. I'm going to ask cabinet members if they have anything they want to say. Start with Laura, then Ian.
Thank you. I mean, it's incredible progress, and I think how far we've come in, to my mind, a very short period of time. So I'm very impressed with what the team has done so far, and the range is enormous. I'm very conscious of the fact that this is what Wiltshire Council's doing. What influence do we have to encourage other organisations that are not in our direct control, from businesses, agriculture, academies? You know, there are hundreds of things that are not directly our responsibility, but how do we grow that Wiltshire way of saying this is what we're trying to do?
If I comment on that, I don't know if Ariane wants to come in on this, but I've been out visiting a lot of businesses in the last few months. The Army has very strongly picked up this agenda. They're trying to arrange a meeting around Tidworth, the super garrison, to look at the schemes that they can bring forward. They're asking us to be involved in that. But other businesses, the cost of energy simply has forced businesses to really focus. We had one example of a business whose energy bill had gone up from about 900,000, 800 and something thousand a year to something like 2.8 million. And that sharpens their mind. So they were putting in every system they could about heat storage, using sand as heat storage to then release back into, or heat traps to release back into the building, so they could heat things up from solar during the day and then release it back in at night, or release it back in later in the day when it was needed. So there's an awful lot going on. I think there are areas that do worry me. Small businesses are tricky because they are focused on survival at the moment. They're always focused on survival, but they're really focused on survival at the moment. And engaging with the public, we are going to need some form of sustained government support for retrofit, particularly in the private rental sector, and for younger people with mortgages who just don't have the spare cash to be able to put money into retrofitting their houses. But is there anything you wanted to add, Ariane?
Yes, thank you. I think it's a really good point about our convening power as a local authority and how we show leadership at the county level. So we're very conscious of that role, and we do convene working groups with other partners. So we've got a public sector working group on the climate agenda, which is under the Public Service Board. And, the college, the police, the NHS, fire, all meet, and we're all on this journey together. So we're all comparing notes, supporting each other, and that's working really well. Richard mentioned a few meetings that we've had with town and parish councils. So we're trying to take them on this journey as well, particularly around the EV chargers. Recently, we also did an event for village hall organisations, for example, to try and support them in making their village halls more energy efficient. We're sort of trying to reach out basically and work with other partners as much as possible. We've also got a retrofit working group with housing associations as well, which is quite active.
Thank you. There is a rather intriguing NHS decarbonisation plan, which is written in NHS, so you've got to translate it first. But they've got some I think, quite cogent paths to try and decarbonise some of their estate, which again is good to see, that they're a large part of our footprint. I'll come to Chris in a minute. I'll come to Cabinet first, and then so Ian.
Thank you, Richard. I just didn't want to miss the chance to highlight, kind of bang the drum for the leisure and operational assets activity in this, and to highlight one particular site, Five Rivers, our leisure centre down in Salisbury, which I visited a week or so ago, and saw what I'm told are amongst the biggest set of air source heat pumps in the country, operational, with the gas now turned off, only kept connected in case of emergency, and the roofs covered in solar panels. They're providing 20% at the moment, will be 25% of the energy requirement of that site when we have put in canopies over the car park as well. And that's just an example of what we're doing across our leisure centres. And to just round that off, the carbon reduction, climate, environmental effect is one of the 5 key factors that we are reviewing every single leisure centre and library across the council area. So just want to highlight very serious success, very serious progress in that area. Thank you.
Thank you. Do I have any other comments? Yeah, Phil.
Yeah, thanks. Just coming on a couple of things quickly. Just to mention that, there were 90 homes that we did with the Green Homes Grant prior to the heat programme. But one of the things we're doing as well is we're bringing forward 260 of our customers within our council housing stock are using oil burners and reliant on oil for the heating. So we're bringing forward them in the heat programme to ensure that we pretty quickly transfer them across. So that'll give us a sort of significant reduction in their emissions, but also save them a significant amount of money as well. And it is worth bearing in mind, within our new builds, within all our construction, we do have a zero carbon agenda. So, for example, I know I've talked about this before, but Melksham House, which is a Grade 2 listed building, is being retrofitted to reduce the carbon emissions, so it will go to carbon zero. And I think that's one of the challenges we have, is dealing with a lot of these particularly old buildings, these listed buildings, which are not built to cope with modern requirements in terms of their energy consumption. So looking at ways and piloting programs to retrofit those is going to be crucial. And it will also provide a sort of, how do I say it, but a template really for how private sector owners and private owners go forward with their own retrofit programs.
Thank you. If I have no other comments from Cabinet, I'll then come down the list as I've got it here. Ian, it looks as though you get to go before scrutiny again. Ian, do you have any questions, comments? Right hand button. I think sitting there is just, it's just doomed, isn't it? Do you want to sit somewhere else? It's those three mics. They...
Very much. Let me come closer. I'm going to come and sit next to you, if that's okay. Thank you. Great. Good. Well, thank you for that. Councillor Ian Thorne, Councillor for Calne Central, Liberal Democrat leader of the Liberal Democrat leader of the group here at Wiltshire Council, and good morning to everybody watching on the live stream. Can I start by, because I think it's really important to say this, what fantastic progress has been made, and particular thanks to Ariane and her team for that, an awful lot of that work, and I think that's important for me to say. And I think that this feels a little bit like the cost of living crisis, or cost of living challenge, as it appears to be rebranded. But anyway, we'll come on to that another day. But in terms of the amount of information, the amount of activity, the amount of energy and effort that's being put behind bringing this absolutely critical initiative to bear. And it's, you know, it's a wonderful thing that, as Richard quite rightly says, reflecting back on the, I don't know whether it's historic, but certainly significant debate that took place at Wiltshire Council back in 2019. And thank goodness that debate took place, because that in part is the reason why we are here. I've got a number of broad points I'd like to make, and a number of specific points in relation to items that appear in the paper. Completely agree with the Deputy Leader of the Council in terms of the really important point about how we don't sit in a silo, that we are engaged and working with all the organisations that are both statutory, our business organisations and community organisations in relation to how we deliver for the whole of the county. And you almost wonder if there needs to be, and this is obviously for another discussion on another day, some sort of statutory requirement for people to engage and work together to ensure that there is a consistency and there is a focus and there is an interest, certainly across the public sector, in relation to their impacts on the climate and in relation to climate emergency. So just picking up on Laura's point about what more we can do, and Ariane, thank you for your contribution in that respect, well, what more we can do as a leader and a highly influential and significant leader in the county to try and draw others into this programme and to engage them in their agenda, but also, of course, to learn from others who are also leading on the issue of climate change. My second point, and I say I'll come on to the detail in a second, is around waste and recycling, because it seems to me there's a huge opportunity here, because we're not performing as well as we'd like, I'm certain of that. And there was a reference, I think, to the response to one of the public questions in relation to public information campaigns. And I rather agree with whoever authored the response to that question. But I do think in this instance, there are huge opportunities for us, again, given the role that we play as the principal local government in Wiltshire, in terms of how we really engage the public to be part of this journey. And it seems to me that recycling is one of the obvious opportunities in relation to the issue of waste management. And I don't know whether the Cabinet member for that area might comment at some point in terms of this discussion. But it does seem to me there's an area where we can potentially see significant improvement. There may be opportunities that we can learn from other local authorities, but my principal point is there may be an opportunity here to really engage the wider community, which I think is absolutely critical in terms of so many of the issues that we're facing that are highlighted in this paper that, of course, contribute to impacts or resolution, mitigations in terms of climate change. My fourth broad point, but I think it does appear in the paper, is in terms of how we judge success and where we are and how we are intending to reach our 2030 target. So I'd welcome a little bit more on that in terms of how we're measuring success, how we're identifying our progress. And I guess the other part of that in terms of the wider picture, coming back to my point about collective organisation activity, is our impact in terms of the whole challenge that we face across the county. And my other wider point, and it sort of rather harks back to some of the discussion we had last time around the risk register. And I try and say this in a non-party political way, because that's obviously not what we want to be doing, whether there's some risk in terms of the direction of the current government, in terms of a slightly more, can we call it, ecocentric type of approach. And that must give some cause for concern, given the debate that we're having here. And I think the very genuine desire that everybody around this table has to achieve some fantastic and positive outcomes. So I don't know whether you want me to stop there, Rich, and then come on to the detail, or whether you want me to get on with the detail. I'm in your hands.
Sorry. I come back in just on a couple of those. Yeah, the waste issue, I would agree. We are pretty average in terms of our recycling rates, and there are councils that do more. They tend to be smaller councils, and it tends to be expensive. There are also changes coming from government around food waste that will make that complicated. But we do need to work out how we take that next step. For example, at the moment, I have a bin bag full of soft plastic wrappers in my car to get to the Co-op in Downton next time I go past it, because I can recycle them there. And we don't have that recycling facility at the moment through our own systems, primarily because of issues around markets. But if the Co-op can find a market, I'm sure that we need to think more carefully about how we can find markets in that position, whilst also bearing in mind the complexity of waste collection. So yeah, there is something there. I don't know if Mark wants to comment further on that.
Yeah, I mean, essentially, there's too much material which can be recycled is appearing in our black residual waste bins. So we're currently undertaking some detailed analysis, looking at exactly what's going in the black bins, so we can target our future educational campaigns and comms activity around that, so we can better improve that situation, so we can get more material which go in the black bins going in the blue lidded bins. But yeah, as Richard said, we're also waiting for government guidance on a number of issues, particularly relating to food waste.
And then, I mean, in terms of judging success, from a council, we report our emissions every year. The trajectory there looks, to my mind, as if we are going to be able to achieve 2030. We know there are challenges in the very last elements of emissions, but we have a path for dealing that. We are, if anything, well ahead of where I would have thought where I would have hoped we would be on that path, which is a testament to the work that's not just been done by Ariane's team, but also by the facilities management and the housing teams. Absolutely. It is amazing what happens when you can empower officers to act in a way that is also saving the council money. It really is amazing some of the stuff they can come up with. I do think we need to be very clear about the overall idea of 2030 for the county. You cannot decarbonise the UK by 2030. I do not know anyone who thinks you can. There are some cities who, on proper analysis, think maybe by 2035 they can be sort of getting there with the emissions from a city area if you take transport out. government targets 2050, working and talking with UK 100, 2045 might, with the right government policies, be achievable, but it's going to take policies from government that we don't set. I think your point about government policy is really valid. I am a member of something called the Conservative Environment Network, which works inside the Conservative Party on this issue. And I must have spent half my time at a conference, either half on probably UK 100, half with the Conservative Environment Network, discussing these issues with ministers, with MPs, making the points about the need to retain the direction of travel that we've got, particularly in areas on the environment. Ariane, do wave if I'm missing anything or you want to add anything. So over to you on the detail. It's all right, we're controlled. Big Brother is controlling
perfect.
you.
No. Stuart, thank you very much indeed. Yes, just pick up on one or two more details, if I may, although not insignificant details. At para 39, I've got my glasses, but I think I've written up 39, which is in terms of housing. And we've discussed this before. It does seem to me that we have a huge opportunity in relation to the preparation of our local plan to make a significant impact in terms of the amount of carbon being produced, not just by building houses, but by people living in those houses. And I accept that we are, back to Big Brother, of course, required to respond to government policy. I completely understand that what we come up with has to go in front of an examination, an inspector, and potentially a plethora of barristers from a range of interested parties. But for example, in my own ward, well, soon to be in my ward, currently in Ashley's ward, we have a planning application for a relatively modest scheme, but 28 houses, a fairly substantial regional stroke national house builder, where each of the units will have ground source heating and PV. There'll be no boilers whatsoever. And it seems to me that if we are, and I think we are, serious about the journey that we're on, then it would be tremendous and important to have that kind of stipulation within our local plan, which undoubtedly will have the house builders howling, I would think. But nonetheless, if we're determined and if we're focused and we're committed, and again, I believe genuinely that we are, that is particularly important. So I think the local plan in some ways provides an opportunity, in many ways, to radically focus our climate change agenda on a significant impact in terms of climate change within the county, and to really send out a message in terms of what this council is all about. Also, just sticking with the local plan, I'm just wondering, again, in terms of our commitment to reducing carbon, whether we want to have, and this is relevant to this discussion, an absolute commitment to no fracking at all in the county. It would seem to me that that's a very, again, positive message, something that would reassure residents in the county, and again, would contribute in a sort of net sense to the amount of carbon that we collectively, as a nation, but also as a county, would be producing. And then just a couple of other final points, if I may. At paragraph 66, there's a reference to one of the old favourites, Richard, in terms of the £1 million a year for business, which I think, as we discussed last year, but for some good reasons, was underspent or unspent. I'm assuming that this is the same £1 million that's now being reflected in relation to potentially supporting our campaign for climate change. I'm always quite keen not to see, as it were, the commitments. Government does this all the time, of course, committing to spend money on several occasions in different ways. I just want some clarity that I think that's the same £1 million per year that we committed to last year and the year before. And then my final point of paragraph 94 is in relation, not actually in relation to pensions and investments at all, but I thought this was the obvious hook, and that is suppliers. Given the enormous number of suppliers in various shapes and forms that this council engages with and uses. And it may be in the paper and I haven't seen it, so apologies, what work we can do with suppliers, which partly goes back to Laura's point about how we can broaden and provide our leadership much more broadly, what we're doing in relation to engaging suppliers and encouraging them, or even possibly telling them contractually what our requirements are in relation to the climate emergency. Thanks, Richard.
Thank you. If I take that last point first, if you look at paras 90 to 93, they're all about procurement and what we can be doing around procurement, including the way in which we are delivering some savings with elements of that procurement as is, and also the fact that sustainability, environmental sustainability, social values and carbon management policies are built into the questions and the criteria we are now using in procurement. They cannot be the sole criteria. Procurement has got to be based on a large number of factors, but they are part of that mix, and it's very clear that they are important to us through that. This council has never, to my knowledge, announced things twice. It is or played that game of constantly announcing the same money in a different way. It's merely being referenced here because part of the work that's going on with the high streets will also be around growing the green economy. And whilst that was underspent last year, the scheme is now up and running, and most of that underspent should be spent this year. Particularly, we're pushing quite heavily on the grants element of it and elements around vacant units. So that work is progressing apace. There will, I'm sure, be a report coming back when we've got more detail to report, but it probably won't be for a few months, given that we had one a couple of months ago. Local plan. I'd love to write a local plan that just made sure that everyone has got to build zero carbon houses and that was making the steps that you are discussing. A local plan must be compliant with National Planning Policy Framework, and it must be able to get past an inspector. Nick, Mark and I are working very closely with officers in making sure that elements of the local plan are as green and carbon friendly as possible. I am confident we will make significant progress there. Bear in mind, we're looking ahead to what policy will be at the point that the plan is adopted, but government is still persisting in the view that they are not going to change building regulations till 2025. So if there is one thing government could do to really move the dial, and I made the point again to several ministers last week, it is to now change that policy or effective in a couple of months' time and get the volumetric house builders to start changing the supply chain. They're the ones who have the greatest influence over the supply chain in the UK. They're the ones who could most quickly make things like air source heat pumps cheaper. The biggest nonsense in it is that we are building houses, particularly in rural communities, that will need retrofitting, probably costing £20,000 a year, £20,000 in total, to get them retrofitted to a zero carbon standard. Yet we're building them right now, and we could build them to that standard for significantly less than the 20,000 that would be required to achieve the retrofit. I keep making the point till my ears bleed, and I will continue to do so. Fracking, there are no fracking licenses in Wiltshire, so it is not something that we are looking at. A local plan could not, if we're being analytical, prescriptively say no fracking, because government could overrule it and have overruled that. It's a matter of government policy, but there are no licence zones in Wiltshire. There were some that were suggested, none were taken up, so there are no licences applying. So it is not something that we are facing at the moment. Just coming back to, one point on the previous issue. We've got delivery plans now going out with KPIs that we're going to be reporting on when it comes to carbon delivery as well. We had the KPI report last cabinet meeting. Sorry, we had the metric report. What we didn't have assigned was KPIs. They will be coming back. I think the November meeting we should have the first draft of KPIs. They are being worked up now, as I said whatever it was, 2 weeks ago. They're being worked up by the departments. They will then be discussed with cabinet members to make sure that they are both stretching enough but not too stretching, and that we're setting the right targets and the right sort of the right goals moving forward. So that as part of the service delivery plans that underpin the business plan and the metrics that we report on, that is all being done. You want to come back briefly? Yeah.
Thank you, Stuart. Just very briefly, just coming back very briefly to the issue of fracking, and I take your point in relation to licenses and so forth, but does anything stop us in planning terms from putting that into our local plan? it may be stripped out by an inspector, but nonetheless, it again shows and sends out a signal in terms of Wiltshire's determination to prevent fracking from taking place in the county.
I'm going to need to get some technical guidance there. I'm not sure it's sensible to put something in a local plan that goes against government policy because it will simply be removed. It's a political statement you're making at that point and not a more sensible one. I think a more sensible argument is the fact that investment in fracking isn't coming from the large energy or the large gas and oil producers. It's coming from small companies because they've got that kind of investment needs a 25, 30-year return. And all the evidence globally is that gas demand will be falling off significantly long before that return will be realised. But if there's some advice on the actual legality of it, please.
We can get more detailed advice, but I believe fracking is something which is regulated by Environment Agency licensing, and it's not as such a land use issue, but I will get more detailed advice.
Okay, thanks. Coming on my list, Graham, Graham Wright, who's joining us online as Chair of the Climate Emergency Task Group.
Thank you, Richard. Yeah, the Climate Emergency Task Group welcomes the Council's commitment to give an update every 6 months on progress towards tackling climate change. Since the declaration of climate emergency in February 2019, we are now seeing progress across the whole Council. However, the Q1 Council Performance and Risk Monitoring Report, which you discussed at your last Cabinet, did show an increase in the Council's own emissions, which just illustrates the need for a constant focus on this particular issue. The task group have seen and discussed many elements before and many of the delivery themes. We have, for example, looked at and commented upon the pathway reports, delivery plans, and the Climate and Environment Forum. The task group will continue to focus upon the key areas that will deliver our climate ambitions. We would also welcome the opportunity to review the next report in May 2023 before it comes to Cabinet. We obviously have a way to go and time is not on our side. I would raise as well that the Climate Emergency Task Group does not look at adaptation and resilience. However, I would highlight that this is an important area. We need to now plan how we can adjust to and the expected climate change and its effects. I would recommend that this is something that the overview and scrutiny can add value to, and we have our programme to look at what we're doing this week, so we can come back to you on a personal level, Richard. Finally, the task group recognises and appreciates the amount of work that's gone into getting us this far, particularly the climate team, but also everybody across the whole Council. Thank you very much, Richard. I didn't introduce myself, so that's Councillor Graham, the ward member for Darlington. Thank you, Richard.
Thanks, Graham. Yes, there is work going on adaptation. I didn't run through all the detail, but yeah, there is adaptation work going on. And again, I wouldn't want to dictate to scrutiny where you want to look. So if that's an area you want to be looking, crack on. Over to you. Just on the point on council emissions, yeah, they were, what was it, something like 4,700 tonnes the previous year and then 5,300 this year. That was the effect of coming out of lockdown. So it's not something that causes me concern in that we're suddenly on the wrong path. It's just the effect of lockdown artificially reduced emissions even lower than they would have been. If you look at the overall trajectory, it is still very much, it's still ahead of honestly where I expected to see it.
Okay, thank you, Richard.
Thanks. If I come to wider members, I've got Chris Williams, who's had his hand up for a while, and then anyone else in the room. Chris.
Thank you, Richard. A brief comment, sorry, Councillor Christopher Williams, member for Lucashall and Rural, Vice Chair of Overview and Scrutiny, and the Armed Forces Champion for Wiltshire Council. Just briefly, when you mentioned the military there, I was invited to spend a day at a camp in our area and to see what they are doing, what is planned to bring that camp, that area to zero carbon emissions in the future. And that this is now going to be extended to the other camps from, shall we say, Lucashall right across to Warminster. So the military are really working to achieve zero carbon emissions on their estate. And that, I think that's great because they are one of the largest, if not the largest partner in the county with the council. So it's great to see them working to that aim. Thank you, Richard.
Yes, thank you. I mean, and on that, they are our largest employer by quite some way in the county. So the fact that they're engaging in this, that's really important. I mean, they account for over 10% of employment in the county. So yeah, it is really good news. I agree. Any other questions or comments on this from members? Caroline, please do come on up, and you'll need to come and find a mic that's working, I'm afraid.
Caroline Thomas, member for Marlborough East. With regard to EV charging, I fully understand on first phases of plans you maybe need some crude criteria for determining where activity takes place. But when we look at phase 3 at some point in time, can I ask that a slightly more nuanced approach is taken to selecting locations? Marlborough, unfortunately, just falls below the 10,000 criteria, but it's probably one of the busiest towns on the A4. Major route through, and the footfall is tremendous, as is the car fall. I'm not quite sure what the technical word for that is. You can often drive around and not find a parking space, and yet we have 2 lit up charging bays in a Wiltshire Council car park that don't work and haven't worked for 2 years. So broadening the criteria for the volume of likely usage, I think, rather than just headcount would be helpful. Equally, what would be helpful is if Wiltshire could be a little bit more cooperative in terms of local councils funding the replacement of no longer working chargers in Wiltshire Council car parks. That would be helpful too. Thank you.
Okay, thanks. Mark, did you want to come in?
Yeah, I think Councillor Thomas makes her point well, and I'll take that on board. And going forward, that's something we can look at. Yeah.
And I would add, we're only going to get to spend money on the EV infrastructure once, given the financial position of councils at the moment. We've just got to make sure it's done properly and appropriately. I also think a couple of months ago, I would have said EV is definitely the way forward. Coming out of various discussions in the last few weeks, there are perhaps some slight question marks about whether EV is going to be the way forward or one of a number of ways forward. The national picture seems to be shifting a bit. Hydrogen seems to be suddenly a bit more possible, perhaps, than it was seen as being a few months ago. And there are some questions about alternative fuel that would run in existing cars that may be becoming cheaper to produce on a scale that makes it relevant. So we've got to keep a very open mind when we look at this and make sure we don't end up wasting money, but that we are providing the infrastructure that's needed. The biggest issue on EV charging is grid capacity. That's the single biggest issue, though that's mostly relates to people charging at home. Yes. Gordon, please.
Apologies if this has come up before. I had to leave the room earlier. Great report, really, full of lot of interesting facts and additional reading, which is very good as well. But when I read it through, the question that came to me was really, so what, really? You've talked about a journey. You talked about getting there. You know, if we do everything and we achieve everything within that thing, where will we be? Will it be journey complete? Will it be almost? Will it be, where will it be? I know it's a shifting beast and everything like that, but how confident are we that that this will make a significant difference?
Thanks. If we look at decarbonising the council, we understand the path we're on. We're pretty confident we can get there by 2030. When you look at the broader picture, there are so many unknowns in this. It's really hard to say. Technology is still changing and moving. The biggest challenge right now nationally would be around grid capacity, as I just said. But you've also then got issues about government policy for retrofit, which is going to be critical to reducing emissions from houses. There's no point in shifting to electric if we're still just blasting heat into the air because we've got inefficient, non-retrofitted houses. Nationally, really good question. I don't think anyone can give you an answer. I don't think anyone anywhere can give you an answer on that. There's no point in politicians making grandiose statements of we will get there by 2030 or whatever when we know we can't. I think it is reasonable. If you look at the UK, 2045 might be achievable with the right government policies and the right approaches. Technology could move faster, it could move slower, there could be all sorts of problems. So it's as good an answer as I can give you. It's really hard to say. Just for anyone listening, beware of simplistic promises on this. There is nothing simple about this journey, apart from the fact government should right now stop anyone building houses that aren't zero carbon. That one is simple.
And also bashing them about adapting them. And, you know, because as soon as you start bashing them about, you release carbon. So making houses that people want or may need in the future, first time, would be fantastic.
It certainly would. Right, thank you. I'm not seeing any more hands up, so we will move to the proposals. We're noting the action, and this will be coming to Cabinet, to full council next week, where those of us who will be attending can doubtless hear this debate with some additional views, probably on bird life, based on the last time we debated it at full council. So all those in favour to note this, please. Thank you. If I then come on to item 7, domestic abuse external grant allocation, year 2. Ian.
Thank you. We'll try and make sure the debate doesn't last quite as long as your item. Good morning. Anyone experiencing déjà vu from last month's Cabinet meeting only days ago, fear not. This is very similar to my last Cabinet foray, but this time it's about the provision of specialist support to victims and their families fleeing domestic abuse. Last month, if you recall, was about substance abuse. We've been supporting those experiencing domestic abuse for some years, but the Domestic Abuse Act 2021 changed moved the goalposts and what we have to do to a degree, and it set out statutory responsibilities on local authorities relating to the provision of support for all victims of domestic abuse and their children, regardless of their relevant protected characteristics, and this is the key bit, within relevant safe accommodation. This additional commitment is being funded by the Secretary of State for Levelling Up, Housing and Communities. Nationally, the grants for year 2 of this 3-year government commitment, that is 22-23, total £125 million. From that, we were allocated previous year 830,000 plus, and for this year we are being allocated £832,348. To give it a bit of flavour around what this can be used for, the provision of support in relevant accommodation, which includes refugees, specialist safe accommodation, for example, BAME, LGBTQ+, disabled victims, single-gendered and/or complex needs, dispersed accommodation, sanctuary schemes, move on, and second-stage accommodation. The nature of provision of support that can include the management of services within the relevant accommodation, day-to-day running, advocacy support, prevention advice, prevent re-victimization, specialist support for victims designed to recognize victims with relevant protected characteristics and or complex needs, children's support, house-related support, active advice services, including counselling and therapy. So it's a very broad range in that. The decisions that have been made so far in this are all underpinned by evidence from local health needs assessments and an independent review of services, including a map and gap exercise, as well as service user engagement. These proposals build on the learning from our first year of this project and provide continuation where early results have been positive and delivered better outcomes. This will enable work to continue, ensure there are no gaps in service delivery, which could place these vulnerable people at risk. To put some scale and proportion on this, it's estimated that there are around 19,000 people within Wiltshire impacted. A good deal of that is hidden from us and other agencies. In the last year, we have assisted 2,200 people, which is an increase from pre-pandemic numbers. And the focus in all of this is to help people to move on. So we're encouraging people within this to move. Yes, they come to protected accommodation, but then to move on and re-normalise their lives. The report's author, Hayley Morgan, is sat down the other end along with our director here. So if you have any deeper technical questions, they will be invited pretty quickly to answer them. We went to Health Select on the 22nd of September, and I expect Johnny Kidney or somebody will be telling you about that. So I'll stop at that point.
Great, thank you, Ian. This strikes me as a very good continuation of the programme. Just to clarify, the reason it's coming to us is because it's above £250,000 that in essence is going on to other providers and or other organisations, and therefore that's why it's got to come to Cabinet for approval. If I come to Cabinet first, Laura.
I know this won't have an hour's debate, as the previous item did, but I don't want anyone to think that that makes it any less important. To me, the work that we do here is absolutely fundamental in our preventative work with both children and adults. And as most people know, in a household where there is abuse, there tends to be other things that are going on there with drug abuse and so forth. So this is absolutely essential work, and obviously I give it my full support.
Thank you. Phil.
Yeah, thanks. It was just to say that I remember last time when this came to us, I did sort of raise the issue of, looking at outcomes and making sure that we were continuing to build upon the good work. So I am, really pleased and comforted to see that is what's going on. There's very much an evidence base in terms of the continuation of the good projects and looking at those outcomes and ensuring that we get the best value and best impact for those people concerned.
Thank you, and I think the debate at Health Select certainly gave me the confidence that analysis was being done and that was being delivered. So if I then come to Ian. Seat along it, so you get a mic that works.
I'm just relying on Stuart to keep the communication going.
That's dangerous. We can just turn it on.
But thank you very much, and thank you to Ian for the report. Of course, any additional resource directed at domestic abuse is extraordinarily welcome. As Ian suggests, it's a little bit like Groundhog Day in relation to the paper that came to the last Cabinet meeting, and clearly there has to be a better way of funding or providing additional funding for these vital resources. And I just wonder whether Richard, in his conversations with ministers and others, I'm sure he is already, but might like to make the point that this is perhaps not the most efficient way in terms of long-term planning and delivery of service. But I've just got three specific questions. One is in relation to the allocation. I'm just fascinated. It may be in the paper and I haven't seen it, in terms of how the government comes to a judgment in terms of how much is allocated to each local authority, if there's a model or an algorithm. I just find that fascinating and interesting. I think Laura's got her hand up. My second question is, in terms of agree to roll any surplus funding to an earmarked reserve, excuse me, no caller ID, just ignore that.
Always turn the volume off.
Well, I thought I had, so I will, let me apologise for that. I'm assuming any earmarked reserve would be a reserve specifically for funding of domestic abuse. Okay, fine. And then my final question is, in terms of accommodation, and there's a sum in there for accommodation, does that include accommodation for male survivors of domestic abuse too? Thank you very much.
Thank you, Ian.
Government algorithms are not my expert subject on that. Your middle question, I remember nodding. Absolutely, yes, because I would like to expand on that a little, because if there is a concern in all of this, it's that it's a 3-year clump of money, or whatever term you want to use. And we can kind of build into what we do much of trying to, I think the experience is that it's growing. So, yeah, I have to admit, I have a residual concern about what happens at the end of it. What we are doing in the meantime is building how we address this and building the evidence for arguing for funds in the future in this. So I'd like to hand over, though, to Hayley to answer the more technical bit of your question.
In relation to the algorithm, so there's a link in the Cabinet paper that should take you to the formal sort of documentation that sets that the actual algorithm that the department used in terms of its allocation. It's incredibly complex, as you probably imagine. It's based on population, based on projected demands and costs, which then is then done by another calculation on modelling. So, but it's all set out in there with regards to that. In relation to the second part, which was around male victims, so actually what we have been able to do as part of the learning from the year one process, we have seen sort of more increases in demand and requests for support for male victims coming through, particularly through our housing and the front door here. So one of the options that we've got in the new year allocation is that we've got an opportunity to repurpose another property working with one of our providers that is very specific for male victims, because, you know, it wouldn't be appropriate to put them alongside female victims. They need their own support, infrastructure and arrangements. So actually I think that's a really exciting expansion to the project, and again will give us a lot of learning through some of those outcomes, and hopefully give some more rich information when we come back to the report as part of scrutiny and next year's proposals. So if that helps.
Thank you. If I then come to Johnny as Chair of Health Select. Johnny is joining us online.
Hi, Councillor Johnny Kidney here, Ward Member for Windsor and Westwood and Chair of Health Select Committee. So yes, we considered this item at our meeting on Thursday, the 22nd of September, which took place in the Kennet Room. The Cabinet Member for Public Health and Public Protection introduced the report, outlining how Wiltshire Council intended to spend the grant application of £32,348 from government in the year 22 to 23. He did explain that it was anticipated that funding would also be in place for 23-24, but that this had yet to be confirmed. Then heard from a public health specialist in the Vulnerable Communities team and a public health consultant who provided background information about the demand for domestic abuse support services and how the council had spent the grant in the previous year, 21-22. They then elaborated on the proposals to spend the money allocated for 22-23 as set out in the report. I'll just run through some of the points that were raised by the committee. Obviously, we thank the Cabinet Member and the Public Health Officers for the update. It was then asked, given the short-term nature of the funding, whether lessons could be taken from the project to improve service delivery, even if the grants were not renewed in the future. In response, it was explained to the committee that there were lessons that could be taken forward, such as improving the pathway for people with complex needs by making sure they receive help from a core group of staff, rather than having to go to multiple agencies for support. There were then some discussions about the military community in our county. It was confirmed that the military did not provide direct funding for the scheme, but that the council worked closely with the military. And given the size of the population in the county, as well as the unique pressures faced by military personnel, some staff are designated specifically to work with military families. Then the leader, Councillor Clewer, reported that respite care was provided by the military at the Cotswold Centre and stated that the council was working to strengthen these links even further, including by working with the Army Welfare Service to signpost vulnerable individuals. There was then a question about the proportion of male victims that were in same-sex relationships. The public health specialist explained that the majority of male victims were in heterosexual relationships, but that it was possible that many in same-sex relationships were harder to reach. She reassured members that there was an engagement worker specifically for people in harder to reach groups to deliver a better understanding of why some victims are less likely to seek support. It was also noted the greatest increase in reporting had been from older people coming forward. There has also been an increase in the reports of parents being victims of abuse from their children. It was asked whether the victims that came report reflected the demographics of the county. It was clarified to the committee that 76% of victims were female and most were between the age of 26 and 35. And it was an offer was made to share further statistics with the committee in due course. So just moving on to our resolution, we noted how the domestic abuse external grant was allocated in 21-22, and then the outline plans regarding how the grant would be allocated in the coming year, 22-23. The specific challenges and work ongoing to support victims of domestic abuse within hard-to-reach groups were noted, and we then scheduled we resolved to schedule a further update on outcomes from the domestic abuse external grant and other domestic abuse work in the year 22-23. So we look forward to having that report in due course. That's it from me. Thank you.
Thank you, and thank you for covering off the military points, which I was going to make sure we raised if someone didn't, so that's great.
Okay.
Do you want to come back in, Ian? No?
I don't think so, thank you. I'm
Okay.
happy to.
Great. Do we have any other questions from members then, please? No? In which case, if you could move the proposals, please, Ian.
I'd recommend to Cabinet that we accept the £832,348 allocated by DLUHC for year 2018 grant, that we agree and finally we agree that any further decisions relating to the distribution of this grant are delegated to the Corporate Director of Resources in consultation with the Cabinet Member for Public Health.
Thank you. I'm happy to second. All those in favour? Thank you very much. If we then come on to item number 8, Parish Stewards Additional Funding. Before, I think we've had a statement of support from Colin Gale. Is there anything further to do there? Or so thank you, Mr. Gale, for your statement. Mark.
Yes, I'm delighted to be bringing this report today, outlining the administration's continued attention to improving Wiltshire's transport infrastructure and expanding our very successful parish steward scheme. And it's always a pleasure to have input from the chair of Rushall Parish Council at our meetings, but even more so today with such a full-throated endorsement of this statement he submitted on Sunday, which is much appreciated. Despite challenging economic headwinds and inflationary pressures, this is the 4th significant additional intervention I've been able to bring to Cabinet this year. This additional 233,000 for parish stewards each year for 3 years follows hot on the heels of an additional 150,000 per annum to tackle fly tipping, an extra 200,000 per annum on line painting, and an extra 333,000 on gully emptying and drainage work for the next 3 years. Time and time again, I hear from members and parish councils that they really appreciate the work that's done by our 18 parish stewards, 20 including the 2 masonry workers in Salisbury, and urging us to put more resource into this area. So it's fantastic that we're able to announce this today. Rather than simply using the additional funding to hire more sort of standard normal parish stewards, I discussed the matter with Chris Clark and the local highways team, and our conclusion was that it would be better to provide a more well-resourced 2-person support team that could be used as a roving resource to be used on slightly larger priorities as they emerge and support the parish stewards who typically would work alone. So this additional 233,000 we're putting into this will hire 2 new employees as well as a range of additional equipment to supplement work carried out by parish stewards, largely with hand tools. Paragraph 10 sets out the additional equipment that will be used by this new team, and the team will be managed from within the local highways team, who will identify priorities and organise the team's workload. The scheme and the additional funding will come through the highways term maintenance contract, and there'll be provision within the new contract, which we'll come on to later in the agenda, for this new initiative and the wider parish steward scheme. So I'm very pleased with this announcement and delighted to take any questions you may have.
Thank you, Mark. If I come then to Cabinet first. I think this is great. I've been raising it. I've had a couple of parish council meetings inside the last week since the agenda's been out. I've mentioned it there, and they have been really supportive and really delighted that the resources going in, particularly to tackle those slightly more complex issues. I don't know, I've certainly seen my parish steward struggling to get a 3-piece suite that's been fly tipped into the back of his cage lorry, cage truck, and having a 2-man team to go and deal with some of those more substantive things will be really, really good in my view. Anything else from Cabinet? Nick. Go on.
Just a very quick question. I was so enthusiastic about this that I couldn't help telling one of my parish councils last week that we would hopefully be agreeing this today. But one of the questions they asked, and I said, well, there'll be more equipment available. It says that the capabilities being improved and the equipment, but will they have to compete with existing department or parts of the same department for some of this equipment? So will there be, will it be instantaneous a request, or will it be like 6 months down the line?
They won't be competing with other parts of the department, but it will be a matter of the local highways team and how they manage the workload to prioritise where that's spent. But this is exclusive additional equipment for this specific purpose.
And I think that makes it really important that parish councils get requests in where they've got those bigger jobs that would need 2 people. So we've got the list and we can get the support out to go and clear them as and when we can. I think it's also perhaps sad to note that this is the last of the budget that we were able to put aside to address some of these priorities. But I do think we are focusing very much on the priorities that I hear from residents when I go and talk to them, the absolute priorities that people come to me with, the constant gripes around particularly white line painting. I've had one of my villages already, and residents are delighted because they feel that it's showing a sign of neglect, and then suddenly the white line's there and we're paying attention, we're addressing the problems they're raising. These may seem very minor compared to the cost of living issues in the UK, but to our residents, these things really matter, and that it's important that we are making sure that we are addressing their concerns. And gully cleaning, it's got an impact on flooding as well. So yeah, important stuff. Anything else from Cabinet? Ian.
Thank you very much, Stuart. Can I firstly congratulate the Cabinet member? He's on a real roll in terms of the fantastic delivery that he's. I mean, genuinely, I'm not just sort of throwing that at him as some sort of political or partisan point, but it's great to celebrate some success, and I've got absolutely no doubt that because I know for a fact that the parish stewards are well regarded. My town of Calne certainly thinks they're extremely valuable and useful, and what Mark is proposing today is an addition to that. So it's something to be congratulated and to be celebrated, I think. My only question is a practical one, that is in terms of ensuring that our towns and parishes understand the additional capacity and the range of activities that may now be available to them with the extra team and the extra equipment. But no, I think this is great news. I congratulate Mark. He's doing a fantastic job as Cabinet member. Long may it continue. A bit of a rising star, I feel. And more good news to come, I hope, in weeks and months. So we'll wait and see. Thank you, Mark. You've got green.
Thank you, Councillor Thorne. Yeah, we'll be extensively communicating the announcement later today, and yes, I can write to parish and town councils.
Thank you. If we then move on from scrutiny, which would be Jerry. Jerry is in the room. Sorry, Parvis, did you want to come in? Sorry.
Sorry, Chair. I was hoping you're briefed that there was a slight amendment proposed.
I am, and we'll deal with it when we get to the actual proposal. So Jerry is as Chair of Environment Select.
Thank you, Chair. Jerry Crankler, Chairman of Environment Select Committee and Board Member for Pewsey. Yes, so Councillor Bob Jones, Vice Chair of Environment Select Committee, and I received a briefing on this report last Friday the 7th. We believe that parish stewards are valued by both councillors and parishes alike, and we therefore welcome this report. The proposal to increase the capacity of the parish stewards by creating a small support team to be deployed where required is to be welcomed. We were reassured that any work will be appropriately prioritised and that the scope of the steward scheme will be reiterated to parishes and councillors to manage expectations. So we are happy to support the report. One word of caution I always think is when you get someone that plans the works ahead of the time, if it's in order of play and someone has a job in Wootton Bassett, then the next job is in Salisbury. I think the planner should try and make it more regionalised in the local areas rather than making them drive it up and down the county. So I do get experience now from beer deliveries on a Friday. They keep being sent all over the county because of time deliveries. But this way, it would be more efficient if we could get them to go neighbour to neighbour rather than in order of play. But we're happy to support that anyway. And well done, Mark. And nice to hear that the member of the opposition is supporting you and congratulating you as well. It's really nice to hear. Well done.
Well, the leader of the opposition is always welcome to cross the floor, of course. The head of, I'm not sure he is actually. The head of local highways is obviously very aware of the issue outlined, and the work will be planned accordingly. Thank you, Jerry.
Thank you. Are there any other questions or comments from members at this point? If we then come to proposals, Mark, do you have the adjustment to the proposal that we need to make to read out, please?
I do. I'll read it. It's recommended that a budget of 233,000 is included for each of the years 2022 to 2023, 2023 to 24, 2024 to 25 to provide a parish steward support service. This one-off funding totaling 699,000 will be provided from the business plan priority reserve. Arrangements should be made with the highways term maintenance contractor for the supply of a suitable two-person team and associated equipment to support the parish steward scheme.
Thank you. I'm happy to second. All those in favour? Marvellous. Thank you very much. So we then move on to item 9, update on social mobility and community conversations. You may recall that I talked at a previous cabinet meeting, and I don't recall which one, about some of the work that we are doing, looking at how we try and tackle the sort of long-term systemic issues around inequality, how we ensure that our own Wiltshire version of levelling up, and levelling up has become one of the most abused words in local government, almost as bad as sustainability, but how we come up with our own iteration, our own way of trying to address areas in our county that need that need support, where generation after generation are really not seeing any significant improvements in attainment, in lifespan, areas where we've got women who are living 14 years less on average in one part of a town than in another part, which is just not right. We have been out with senior leaders from all of our key partners. The only way I think this is going to work is if it's not just elements inside Wiltshire Council providing support, so it's not just people and place or education doing something and then adult social care doing something else, but it's a joined up approach involving all elements of Wiltshire Council acting together, but also the NHS, particularly the NHS, because they put an awful lot of their resource into areas that would be classed as suffering from health deprivation, and the voluntary sector and the police and local communities. So we went out, we did some exploratory work to make sure what we were looking at we felt would work as an idea, to see how it would need to evolve as we took it forward. This isn't fundamentally about extra resource, it's about making sure that all the different bits of resource that all the organisations are putting in are being applied in the most collectively beneficial way, that we're all working together rather than working in isolation. It also needs to involve housing associations. So in Trowbridge, that involves Selwood as a separate organisation. I asked for a report to come formally to Cabinet and to Council at this point, because I think it's important that councillors collectively understand what it is we're doing, why we're doing it. If you read our business plan, basically this work is what the business plan is about. It's certainly what the 4 underlying principles of the business plan are about. There are a number of models being developed. From our side, Prof Doom is leading on the work. Sorry, Kate. So public health seemed to be the most suitable place to lead this kind of work, because of the ability of public health to sit across all the different partners that need to be involved. The model and approach is around what's called asset-based community development, which is about making use of what a community has, but also help building on the gaps in provision that community has, and trying to build that resilience. Communities are in very different places. We've looked here at two specific communities, Studley Green and Bemerton Heath. There are a number of other divisions in or lower super output areas inside Wiltshire that that we will be looking at applying this principle to as well. So it's not going to be quick, it's not going to be simple, it's not something that I think needs to be overly political, but I do want to make sure we are aware of the work that is going on. If this is to deliver, it is going to take many, many years of continual work and continual building capacity inside communities and building interoperational, sense between the different organisations so that we are focusing our resources collectively in a way to solve the problems. There is no point in addressing an education issue in an area if the housing state or the state of the roads or the state of health in the area means that the education is then undermined because all the work going in there means no one's got any space to actually do the work that or do their academic work, or they're in an environment that's simply depressing and drags them down. This has got to be holistic. Kate, is there anything you want to add? Yeah. Because I'm acutely aware I don't want this to be seen as something that is a political drive. I want this to be seen as something that is a fundamental part of the business plan and for the entire council and partners. So.
No, I think the only thing to add is the really exciting bit, which, as you said, this takes a long time. And sometimes in public sector, we're driven by different levers that mean we take a short-term approach to something. And it's really exciting that we have this long-term vision and that actually the key to all of this is our residents, it's our population, and not predetermining what the issues may be in any area, but actually really truly working with our population. And that does take time to build trusted relationships. So yes, this isn't something that's going to suddenly transform lives in 6 months. I imagine some things will change in that time for the better, but I think this is a really good, interesting local approach to really trying to tackle intergenerational inequalities.
Thank you. Yes. And I should add, we did have Joe Trigg and I think it was Tom Corbyn from Salisbury City Council also joining us on those visits. So I'm trying to make sure that on the ground, this again it's not being politicised, it's being driven by the relevant people in the relevant places to get that engagement, because it's absolutely critical for that long-term buy-in.
Sorry, I can never add just one thing. I think probably the other thing to say is there is so much happening, not just in these two areas, across the whole county. And what really is important is not trying to step on people's toes, not trying to duplicate what's already working really brilliantly, but looking at it in that holistic way. And I think that's initially, particularly working in these two areas, that was some really early learning and some really good relationships that have started to develop between the stakeholders. So that does take time.
Great, thank you. Are there any questions or comments from Cabinet on this? Thank you. Ian.
Yes, thank you. That was very interesting. Thank you very much. I have to say, I spent some of my professional life working in relation to economic regeneration in some of the toughest communities you would find anywhere in the UK. And so this is absolutely fascinating work, I think. And I suppose the first question is, in terms of shared learning, because clearly we're not the only local authority, and indeed other agencies working that are engaged in this. So I'm really interested to understand whether some of the things that we're doing has been inspired by other authorities and other partner organisations beyond Wiltshire. I'm also interested, because I've got Joe here, who's come in specifically to talk to this item. And it does seem to me that the councillors are, or certainly should be, and let's say are positively, are advocates for their communities and are engaged in communities, probably at a level that most authorities are, for a whole host of reasons, but I might come back to that in a moment. So in terms of how we get, assuming these sort of projects appear elsewhere in the county, how we encourage other members, as in councillors, to get involved. But my kind of core question, which is not a criticism of what's been delivered so far, it genuinely isn't a criticism, but I'm just intrigued because one of the challenges that I've seen elsewhere is whether a local authority, and indeed any statutory body, can be a real motivator for change, a real organisation that is capable of engaging with people who are least likely to be engaged. And I have to say, I remember from my days as a London councillor, one of the slogans that we had quite often was, "Would you vote for your landlord?" And although in Trowbridge in particular, we're not the landlord, we are the authority, we chase people. So I'm just interested, and it's a genuine interest in terms of how we get over the challenge of engaging people as the local authority, given that for a lot of people, their impression of any local authority, it's not just Wiltshire, is normally quite negative and quite difficult. And the last thing that people want to do is engage with the council, the police, or the health service. So I'm just fascinated to understand what approaches and methodologies we're using in order to reach people beyond the usual suspects, I guess, the people that really need our help and support. I've gone on for far too long, but hopefully you've got my point.
I'll start and then bring Kate in. I think councillors bring a lot of different skills to the table, and different councillors approach the role in different ways. They can be great advocates for communities. Some councillors represent disparate communities. Some are focused in particular areas. I don't think councillors do come and go with electoral cycles and their own lifestyles, their own choices. So I do think this needs to be something that is ingrained not just at a member level, but far more deeply than that. And I think that's really important. I wouldn't want to be creating single points of failure through members. And I'm not having a go. I think it's great if members want to be engaged on this kind of work if it's happening in their area. But I think it's about creating organisations. It's about creating long-term capacity. I think from a local authority point of view, I would agree that the local authority coming in to dictate is not a good thing, but we have a great power to convene and bring partners together. The public sector board that we hold is a great way of bringing our partners together, and it means that someone in Kate's position has huge influence then with the NHS or with the police, because we're all addressing the same issues, we're all agreeing priorities. It then compels them in to help actually focus and work on those priorities. And we are looking at increasing the outreach of the public sector board slightly with areas around the voluntary sector. We had a representative of one of the bishops attend to the last public sector board, again, because we're looking at trying to access and tap into that wider community in a way that it fundamentally they're trying to address some of the same issues. Kate, over to the detail.
Yeah, no, I would say absolutely. I think a local authority is a fantastic agent for change, but sometimes in the background. We learnt a huge amount during the COVID vaccination, and actually the outreach work that we did for that is very much targeting the same groups and the same communities of individuals who live in those areas of higher deprivation. And that was all about trust and relationships. It was all about not seeing a specific lanyard and having an assumption made by the population. And that was by going and having conversations, not just immediately turning up and saying, you must have a vaccine, that's what's missing, but actually understanding people. And that's why this is going to take time, because it absolutely has to be about understanding people. We're not going in to fix something. How would we know what's missing or what could be made better? And so the very early work that we're doing at the moment is absolutely working through those fantastic community groups, community champions, local leaders who really are already a trusted voice in that area, not trying to duplicate that in any way, but trying to bring that together, as Richard said, with our influence across wider partners, so that things can change for the better. Wouldn't it be fantastic if we were back here in 10 years' time and our gap in healthy life expectancy was actually narrowing, which would be against all the trends we see across the country, but that would certainly be my aim.
Just if I may.
The mic on for you, sorry.
Thank you, because this is really fascinating stuff. And I agree with you in terms of the fact that the whole focus is, I guess, about building capacity and providing, as far as we ever can, a degree of ownership and control amongst those groups. And I was telling my colleagues before this meeting, I was involved in many projects over a number of years, but there was one that really sticks out, which was a project in the Black Country, in Dudley. And it was on a huge, what I would describe as digging for Britain, former council estate, so big long gardens, a place called the Wren's Nest. And there are a whole range of projects and activities that were really owned by the residents. But one of the best projects was a garden tools library, because one of the big problems there was that people couldn't afford a mower or a spade or whatever, so you could borrow your mower for the weekend. And this obviously wasn't a library run by the council. This was run by a group of women who would call themselves the Tattooed Ladies, because they had henna tattoos on their hands, etc. And I can tell you, if you borrowed a mower on a Friday and they told you to bring it back on the Monday, you brought it back. But there was that sense of real ownership, and etc. So thank you very much for that. And my final question is, when are you guys coming to Calne then? When can we welcome you to Calne?
This is going to be based around evidence and based around evidence of the areas with highest deprivation. I think you are lucky in Calne that you don't have any lower super-rapid areas that feature particularly high on that list. There will be learning lessons from this that I would hope we will see rolling out across the entire council. I am acutely aware rural poverty doesn't sit in a lower super-rapid area, but is incredibly hard to address. So you want...
I was just going in terms of that future learning, and you reminded me, Richard, because you were talking about, are we looking at best practice elsewhere, which we absolutely are, but the King's Fund have already approached us because they've got wind of what's happening, and they'd like to showcase it, and I've actually said no, not at the moment, because it should be our residents who are showcasing it, not us. So really trying to see things differently, and it's really difficult, it's really hard. We had a meeting right at the end of August that Joe was at with us, and it was a meeting where there was no set plan or time frame on this, because you can't put a time frame on building a relationship, and that can be quite an uncomfortable place to be in. But if we're all uncomfortable together, then I think we can make a huge difference.
And to be blunt, when I first was thinking about this, pretty much just after becoming leader and sitting down and looking, I did a lot of looking at what was out there in the world. And I'm not convinced that this has really been done in quite the way we're trying to do it in a rural area before. It's been done in cities. It's been done in larger areas. There's some work that's gone on in rural communities, but I'm not sure there is a simple path to follow. There are broad principles, which is what Kate's pulling in, but we are going to have to find our own way in our own communities. And I think it's going to be different in each one, which is the most important thing to learn so far. I think it's going to be an interesting journey. Thank you. We don't have a scrutiny comment on this. Do I have any? I'm going to bring Joe straight in next. Stay there, Kate. Then there will be other questions on this.
Joe Trigg, member for Trowbridge Lambrock, which includes Studley Green. So first of all, thank you for the fact that Studley Green is one of those areas that's being focused on. And I appreciate that that's only because of the depth of deprivation there. So thanks for the report, the co-production approach, and everything that's talking about here, I think is exciting, not just, as I've said, for Studley and Bemerton, but actually what that could mean for the wider authority. And as you're aware, I'm heavily involved with Trowbridge Future, and that is very much that approach, that co-production. I'm working alongside communities. It's not for any of us to tell people how to live their lives. It is for us to help support people as they find their way forward. I probably have given a bit of feedback to the officer, a bit pedantic about some of a couple of things that are in there. So paragraph 18 does talk about youth investment fund bid having been already developed, has been developed. That's not the case. We are working on that. One of the issues for members wider is understanding Wiltshire Council own no land and have no assets in Studley Green, and that in itself creates some of its own issues, apart from primary school that's there. I suppose the one thing, and I am conscious that conversations and building trust is very important, and you cannot put a time frame on how strong that trust is or how you pull networks together. But I am always naturally impatient. So I guess the thing that makes me nervous, without having any scope of time frame of even where we might want to be, is knowing how difficult and
the budgets are going to be for everybody over the next 2 or 3 years. Is that commitment to staff and officer time? And if we don't set anything around that, my concern is always that it gets lost. If you don't actually say, we will commit that we will have that focus, that it just gets lost. And it is an area, Studley Green, that doesn't have the advantages of Bemerton Heath. It doesn't have strong community associations in place yet, but the kernels of that are just starting, which is really, really exciting. And I know Andrew Morrison has been out and met with that. So we can see how that is going, but it will need that commitment from the council to be able to support it. So I will come back to my question really is, there will be stages that we feel we're going to try and hit, and I'd be interested to understand what those are or see them in the report.
Thanks. Do you want to comment on that first then, Kate, and I'll come back?
Yeah, absolutely. So everything that hopefully this work done will be driven by the community. So we will have loose timeframes in place that will need to flex and change. But yeah, we can absolutely put it into a future report that comes out, and everybody that was involved in that initial workshop that we had will be kept updated on a weekly, fortnightly basis, because I really desperately don't want people to think that this has just been forgotten. I think, as Richard said, this is absolutely core to the delivery of the business plan, and is a really exciting opportunity, not just across us as Wiltshire Council, but all of our partner organisations as well, who are again so keen to make sure we do this as one joined up system. So, but yeah, we can absolutely loose timescales, absolutely.
And Joe, to address your point about resources, no one can make commitments about council funding at the moment. I mean, you just got to look at the headlines across the country. But this is our business plan. It isn't just embedded. Fundamentally, there are four elements of our business plan, all of which relate to this. It is the sine qua non of why we are here. It's the rationale. If we can't deliver this as a council, honestly, I think we should pack up and go home. So that's the commitment that we've got to it. It's vague, but it's there. Go on.
So my comeback is going to be, I absolutely accept that, and I think it's going to be very difficult. I have the alternative concern is for some of the small voluntary or charity organisations involved. We are obviously under significant pressure. And again, that is thinking about how we build in the time additionally to make sure we are able to give information, work with the council as well as everyone else. And I know it shouldn't feel extra, that will be part of it. But I think there needs to be that real acceptance that we are all struggling really now to have robust funding going forward. And we need to be careful not to be able to expect some of the charity partner organisations to deliver as much as we might want them to, as much as we might want to do so.
I think that's a really fair point, and I think everyone's going to be under strain, and it's a case of having the partnership to enable work to continue with whatever resource we've got. But hey, if in 10 years we've done something with life expectancy, we've really made a difference. Okay, any other comments from members? In which case, this report's just hit a note. So if I move it, can I have a seconder, please? All those in favour? Thank you. We then come on to item 10, New Term Highways Maintenance Contract Results of Procurement Exercise. Mark.
So back in January, I brought a report to Cabinet where we agreed the process to invite tenders for the new term highways maintenance contract. The current contract held by Ringway has been held since January 2016 and expires at the end of March next year. Dave Thomas and his team have been working incredibly hard this year, working on the tendering process and scoring the suppliers who've taken part in the procurement exercise. 3 companies invited to tender made the final shortlist, which were deemed to have the capacity and capability to deliver the contract, and their final tenders were submitted to us on the 8th of September, and officers have spent the past month analysing the submissions and scoring them across a range of criteria. Now, the officers will go into more detail on the scoring in part 2 later in the meeting, but essentially there was a 40, 30, 20, 10 weighting used. So 40% of the score was based on the price, where each supplier had to state their charges for a basket of goods, which would typically be delivered through the contract. And that made up the bulk of the price assessment. 30% of the score was looking at quality, where the suppliers had to respond across a range of metrics on the ability to carry out maintenance, winter services, their management structure, and a whole range of other factors. 20% of the score was based on the ability of suppliers to demonstrate carbon reductions through the contract, and 10% of the score was based on social value. This looks at whether suppliers will work with the community, provide opportunities for disadvantaged people, and that sort of thing. So the suppliers had to submit detailed responses to all the various questions, which were then assessed by the officers, fed into a spreadsheet, the numbers were crunched, and then the outcome of that process, a successful supplier emerged. It'll be a 5-year contract with a further 5 years dependent on performance. There's not really much more to be added at this stage. I suspect some of the questions will be more focused on the part 2 discussion, but happy to take any questions that come up now as well. Thank you.
Thank you. Does anyone from Cabinet have any comments on this? I suspect any discussion probably will be in part 2, but Ian, anything at the moment? Jerry, anything at this stage?
Yeah, Jerry Conkler, Environment Select Chair, Pusey Ward. So I've received a briefing about this on about part 1 of this report on the 7th of October, along with Bob Jones, Councillor Bob Jones, Vice Chair of Environment. And also we included Councillor Pip Ridout, Chairman of the Financial Planning Task Group, and I hope she's getting well and strong and hope she's listening to this today, and we'll be glad to see her back in the chamber very soon. We heard about the procurement process to date, and we welcomed the new emphasis upon carbon reduction through the contract period. We raised the issue of the price and cost inflation, and we're reassured that these risks are being identified and that actions are being undertaken to mitigate those risks. We also welcomed the focus upon the quality, and we heard about the quality assurance process. The Environment Select Committee will continue to monitor this contract for the annual reviews of the performance. I do welcome the fact that you're going to offer perhaps 5 to 10 years, because this gives the contractors more confidence in when they buy in their equipment, and that it makes it longer lasting. It can be more effective. I mean, we know that potholes have always been a problem in the county. Some of these machines now are a lot more advanced, a bit more expensive, so I think it gives them confidence. I welcome the fact that we give them a longer contract. Thank you.
Thank you. Do we have any other comments from any other members at this stage? Because, for members of the public present, because we will be discussing some of the detail, or potentially discussing some of the detail around the tenders, we will be going into part 2 for that. So there may well be more comments there, but that's commercially sensitive information, and therefore we can't be discussing it in the open meeting. So we will save the actual proposals and recommendations for part 2. So if we then move on to the last item in the open part of the meeting, remobilisation of City Hall. If I run through this, and I suspect we can probably deal with more of the any discussion that we need to have here in the open session. City Hall in Salisbury, it's a venue opened in 1961. Should note that it was also partly funded as a war memorial to people who gave their lives from Salisbury during the Second World War. It has operated under as a live music and entertainment venue. I am on record as saying that towards the end it got a little bit derivative. I much preferred it when you had live acts performing their own music. There it's somewhere I've spent many an enjoyable session with the family, and a less enjoyable one for Jerry's sake with Chuckle Brothers there, which I found excruciatingly painful, but the kids loved. It was closed on the 20th of March 2020 with the pandemic, and it was then opened as a vaccination centre in December. After closing it, when we looked at the best way forward, we felt the best option was to mothball it. That was the decision that came through Cabinet. It is run as a vaccination centre and will continue until March 2023 as a vaccination centre. Again, for those in Salisbury, I think I had one of my jabs there, possibly 2 of them. It's somewhere that probably most of us have filed through as part of the vaccination process, and that has worked really well. We've always said we will reopen the venue as a music and entertainment venue when it's no longer needed as a vaccination centre. and that's the reason for the report coming today. We slightly complicated this by also putting in a Levelling Up Fund Round 2 bid looking for a substantial capital grant to improve City Hall. And until we know the outcome of that grant, it's kind of tricky to give an exact timescale as to what will happen when. If we get that grant, we will be looking at some significant work to City Hall to improve it as a venue, and that would take it out of action for probably till 2025. And it could result in a very significant enhancement to the way City Hall works and what we could offer there. If you speak to people who perform there, the acoustics could be better. The design of the building could also be better. Jerry may come in with comments about bar space. He's far more of an expert on that than I am. So if we're successful in that, we would expect work to start in October next year and finish in January 2025, which would clearly delay any reopening because it would be very significant structural work. If we are not successful in that, then again, we would look to undertake some smaller structural work. We've been looking at trying to do works to City Hall for a very long time, and there have always been reasons not to because it's been operating. There are works that we could undertake that would make it more financially viable, more functional as a venue, even without the substantial grant. So we would look at, if we aren't successful with the grant, those works going ahead, it opening in December 2023. And we are then looking at 3 options that we've put in this paper. To source a third-party organisation to operate City Hall as an entertainment venue on our behalf. For us to manage and operate City Hall internally using the same model that we used to. I think it's worth noting that consistently ran at a loss. We're an adult social care organisation. We do an awful lot of other things, 600 other services or something like that. I forget the precise number. But we're not an operator of live music venues, and there are a lot of people out there who are have a lot more expertise in operating live music venues. So our assessment there was that we felt it would be better to bring an operator in who is skilled in this environment rather than us do that alongside everything else that we're doing. The last option was to sell or asset transfer the venue to an external organisation. We didn't feel that was appropriate for a number of reasons. So the recommendation that's being brought forward is to go with option 1, to look for sourcing a third-party organisation to operate City Hall. I'm not sure there's anything else I need to cover. It's a hot topic in Salisbury. It means a lot, particularly to the older residents of Salisbury. I'm clearly an older resident of Salisbury now. I've been there for a long time, who can recall attending it and going to all sorts of events there in the past. I will stop talking at that point. Anything from Cabinet? No? In which case, I'll come to Ian.
Thank you, Richard. Nothing to add. I mean, I would agree instinctively in terms of the decision around the management. I think it's such a specialist market. It's such a challenging and difficult market that we really need somebody in there that knows exactly what they're doing and how they can turn a profit. But that's all I would add at this stage. Thank you.
Thank you. Jerry, as Chair of Environment Select and someone who's had experience of what can be done with the building previously.
Thank you. So again, on the 4th of October, Bob Jones, Chairman of Environment and Select, and myself have had a briefing on this. We welcome the report. We look at the options as presented, and with a commitment to address some of the building structural issues, we would endorse the report. The City Hall could be an important addition to Salisbury's visitor and nighttime economy, so we support the work to ensure that the venue opens as a viable concern. Now, in the past, many, many years ago, I took my mum, who was a big Ken Dodd fan. We all took her down there to watch it in early 2000s. Thoroughly enjoyed the show myself. Full house. And again, and more recently in 2009, being a Genesis fan, I went to see Steve Hackett and Genesis Revolution. But my feeling is that we did a feasibility study on this back in 2012. If Bournemouth can have the BIC and the Pavilion, and the Southampton can have the Mayflower, and New Berkshire can have the one at the Watermill and the Hexagon, I'm sure that Wiltshire can provide an entertainment centre which goes along, complements the Playhouse. And we also have the Neild Hall at Chippenham as well, because I did try getting question time in the City Hall, but it went to the Neild Hall. This venue is oozing entertainment. And it also, like I say, helps the economy round. There is a lot of work that can be done inside. And I know that David Redfern and a few of them, they're going to be on this. And option one is probably the way to go. But let's not lose it as an entertainment centre, because this county needs something for people to do in leisure. So I support this. Okay. Thank you.
No, thank you. I agree. And I think live music and entertainment is really important. And we don't have many venues to provide it. This is one. Do I have any further questions from members on this? Yes, Tony.
Thanks. I'm Tony Jackson, the member for Warminster Broadway. I'm also a member of the Warminster Athenaeum Management Committee. And I'm not opposed to anything which may see the revival of Salisbury City Hall, although I am conscious that there are a Salisbury Arts Centre and a Salisbury Playhouse in Salisbury, so I don't think you're particularly short of places to go and be entertained. My point really is that within arts subsidy, which Wiltshire Council does or doesn't provide, the Warminster Athenaeum sees nothing. And for the longest continuously operating theatre in Wiltshire, I think that's shameful. And if we're spending millions in Trowbridge and millions in Salisbury, I think finding the odd 100,000 for Warminster is something that Wiltshire Council ought to be able to do. Thank you, Simon.
Thank you. I would note that the money we are spending in Salisbury and Trowbridge isn't money that's coming from Wiltshire, it's money that's coming from central government. But when it comes to the funding of arts organisations, we fund, well, technically four. We fund Wiltshire Creative, which includes the Salisbury Playhouse and Arts Centre, but we fund them as Wiltshire Creative, and they also do a lot of rural outreach work. We fund Corsham, Pound Arts at Corsham, we fund the Wiltshire Music Centre, and we fund to a very small degree Town Hall Arts. Those are the only organisations we fund. The aim here is to have City Hall functioning as something we don't need to fund, that we have an operator in who can self-fund and run it themselves. But I take the point, resources are difficult. The only way we get significant money in for this kind of capital project is through central government funding pots. We're back to a point that was made earlier. I didn't come back on about pots of funding from central government. Yes, the point is being made incredibly clearly to government, including by the LGA, perhaps as the most powerful voice collectively of all parties together, saying, for goodness sake, stop making us bid for things, give us money and let us work out where to spend it. Because if we had it, we could then prioritise based on our needs as opposed to government criteria, which restrict us to things that mean that I haven't got a site in Warminster I could put a levelling up fund bid in for, but I do in Salisbury and Trowbridge.
Thank you.
Thank you. Any other comments from members? Technically, I think we probably need to go into part two before we move the recommendations here. So we won't actually make the formal recommendation at this point, but we'll come back to it shortly. So we've got no urgent items, in which case I will move to exclude the present public to give notice in accordance with para 5 brackets 4 and 5 brackets 5 of the local authorities executive arrangements brackets meetings and access to information brackets England regulations 2012 of the intention to take the following item in private. So to pass the following resolution, to agree that in accordance with section 100A brackets 4 of the Local Government Act 1972 to exclude the public from the meeting for the business specified in item numbers 14 and 15, because it's likely if members of the public were present, there would be a disclosure to them of exempt information as defined in paragraph 3 of part 1 of the Schedule 12A to the Act, and the public interest in withholding the information outweighs the public interest in disclosing the information to the public. I move that. Can I have a seconder, please? All those in favour? Thank you. So if we can now move into part 2.